Hi, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our casual coffee chat with CluedIn to discuss uplifting your data quality. Today's an interactive session, so feel free to ask questions or type it in the chat box as we go through. We're joined today by Martin Merrick, a technical consultant here at Antares, and Tim Ward, the CEO of CluedIn. So I'll pass over to you, Martin, and we can kick off.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, it's really good to be here. Normally people just call me Marty, like from Back to the Future, so that's fine. But yeah, look, so I've been working at Antares for almost a year now and have been exposed to CluedIn and working with our customers using CluedIn for that time. So it's really exciting to be here. I wanted to share some insights from our perspective and get your thoughts, Tim, as well. Of, what you see. I suppose it's the main pain points that you see customers having and how CluedIn can solve those issues for them. So I want to kick off with, I guess, just an initial question around, this discrepancy between what IT wants and what the business wants, right? So, so it's often that we find ourselves in a situation where IT is provided with a whole bunch of data. And that data contains a whole bunch of quality issues. And so when you're building these, data platforms, it's often the case that I'm seeing that IT are pushing back on business and saying, hey, your operational, your operation or your platform should really be giving us quality data, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of us having to own that mm-hmm. process of cleansing and creating quality. So how do you, I suppose, what are your thoughts on that process, and how can CluedIn help in providing that quality data for these data initiatives?
Yeah, cheers, Marty, and also to the extended team and everyone watching. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with the Antares group. Yeah, I mean, I was smiling along the way because this is something that not only we, I'm sure at Antares you do as well, but we at CluedIn, we run into this conversation quite a lot. In fact, as a small anecdote before we dive in, when I got into the data space, I'm probably young compared to, how long other people have been in the data industry for, but I only got into it 6 or 7 years ago. Before that, I was in more software engineering. And one of the things that absolutely surprised me, if not baffled me, when I first got into data was watching different, service companies implement a classic data warehouse. And in building up that data warehouse, I watched some, data experts wire these different tables together using joins. And there were all these records that got dropped in those joins because there was no ID to link the different tables. And I was so just taken aback by the fact of the kind of accepted answer for that was, well, that's not our problem. Like the operational systems should be sending us data that we can actually blend from across these different systems. And to be honest, they're not wrong, but they're also not right. In that, what are you supposed to do in that case where there's not an easy way to blend or link data together to build those traditional data warehouse, but at the same time, there clearly lacked a process in place to remedy that. And what it meant is that, this was probably some of the reasons why our financial reports were off, like where our financial systems were showing one number and our BI systems were showing another one. And it's these types of things and that lack of process that doesn't surprise me why, and people like Antares and experts like yourself, Martin, are kind of seeing the same types of things and challenges around, finger pointing at who's responsible for fixing these problems. I would say if we dive into the specifics around this, I would argue that fixing data quality, and this is not even a theory anymore, Martin, I would say I can stand behind this with full conviction that this is just a fact today, that where you fix the actual data quality issues will vary between a centralization and a decentralization approach, right? It'll be a combination of both of these things. And Martin, I'm sure you've been in the industry long enough as well to know that we go through these cycles in our industry where things should be decentralized, and then we come back to centralization, and then we go back to decentralization, and that trend just continues. And time after time, the truism in it is that it'll always be a healthy combination of both, right? And this is the same with data quality. There are some challenges in data quality that should, can, and will be fixed back in the operational systems, 100%. But what you'll notice is that the main complex data quality issues, they usually start to crop up and show themselves when data starts to come together from across these different systems. You can have the most pristine CRM in the world, but the standardization and the way that you've normalized and harmonized that data could drastically differ from other systems. So the challenges around that harmonization of, you know, how are we formatting dates, how are we structuring countries, are we using 2-digit country codes, country names, are we using some proprietary identifier that we've come up with? You know, those problems are more left for either a centralized approach, or there needs to at least be some point where these crossroads meet where you solve those things. Now, those can definitely be prefaced with good standards, but you'll know, Martin, the bigger a company gets, the less its ability to actually apply those standards across the entire globe, right? So I think this realization has to hit that there'll always be this need to push data quality issues back to the operational systems. But in the same vein, you have to realize that those owners of those systems are probably not aware of all the other systems that are in play as well. So they're as much in the dark as the data warehouse team was in, there's a data quality issue and it's not my problem. You could argue that this kind of banter goes back and forth of, well, it's also not my problem because my operational system is working. So whose problem does it become? And I think what we've found as success, and Martin, I'd love to hear your input on this from some of the customers that you're working with as well. But this is obviously culminated in the need for data teams that are responsible for at least being this orchestrator of these types of processes that are missing, and being that adjudicator that's saying, well, to be honest, overall, it's our overall company's problem. It's not IT's or the business or the operational systems. And so we see that these data teams are taking this kind of internal referee position of, hey, in these cases, we should fix it back in the operational system. In these cases, it should actually be fixed in a harmonized, centralized manner. But Martin, very interested to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, it's an interesting couple of points there. So I often come across large projects. So I actually come from a data analytics and data science background. Right. So that's sort of the type of projects that I work on. And I often come across these large projects where everything is accounted for. How do we build a data warehouse? How do we build a data lake? What systems are we putting into place? The only thing that's missing, or very often missing, is a master data management, right? And so it's kind of forgotten about, and it's or almost as a secondary thought or secondary priority. So, from my perspective, in data analytics and data science, it's very important to have good quality data. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out type scenario. I guess, it's a good segue to my next question, actually, where there has been initiatives in that I have seen customers try to tackle this problem with MDM, even prior to CluedIn, right? People have been recognizing that there is a gap and trying to solve this MDM problem, but it's often the case that it does fail, right? And I was wondering, from your perspective, your insights around why do MDM projects fail, and why is it that CluedIn can help in these situations so drastically?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one of the things I hope I never come off as is this biased person that just because I operate in the MDM space, I somehow think it's the most important part of the overall chain. And the fact is, it's just one small component of many different pillars that will make you successfully a digitally transformed company.
Yeah.
In saying that, MDM is, like the data warehouse, a very old category, and it's the practice that's been around for so many years. In fact, I would argue the first kind of glimpse of MDM came in early 90s, so about 30 years ago. So it is an old category. And I don't remember the exact quote, but like the definition of what MDM was supposed to bring to the market was, hey, all the other tools and practices are all IT driven and IT operated. And here's this thing called MDM, which is supposed to not be IT implemented and IT operated. Mm-hmm. It was this concept of, right, IT engineers have enough tools, but there's still this part of the supply chain of data that should not be solved by engineers. And I hope I can say that because I've spent my entire career as an engineer, and I have learned that there's parts of that improvement of data quality that MDM was supposed to bring that has to be solved by someone who understands the context of the actual data. And, experts in data like yourself can give it a damn good go, but you've often got a question, should you be doing that? You've got your own tools, Martin. Yeah. You are supposed to use Databricks, and you're supposed to use Synapse and ADF and Python and SQL. That's tools that are targeted towards your persona. And MDM, you're right. Hand on heart, MDM is one of the most traditionally boring places to sit in data, and that's also why, to some degree, it's probably an afterthought, because anyone who's done MDM before, you realize, oh, it's super hard. It's so complicated for a couple of reasons. I think the main ones are that, number one, we're trying to somehow persuade that we've got a tool that the business can operate, but actually majority of these projects are still just handed over to IT to operate. And in that same vein, you don't blame someone like Martin saying, don't give me that, I've got my own tools, right? So it's not given the actual attention that it needs. The other one I would say is traditionally why this failed. And I mean, you don't have to hear the stats from us. All the analysts are saying the same thing, and we've got enough years worth of data to back this up. This year alone, 75% of these MDM, 3/4 will fail. And that is catastrophic. And if you ask anyone that's implemented MDM and data warehouses and data integration projects, and you ask them, what's harder to implement out of those three? Often you don't even have to finish that sentence. They've already answered MDM. Like if that was your first option, they'll say, stop there, I don't need the other options. And it's because a lot of the time it's down to MDM is about solving all of the parts that can't be fixed in an automated way through IT, right? In that we can standardize date formats across systems with a high confidence. You can't 100% confidence, but with a high confidence, you can standardize those things with IT. But what about all these edge cases where there's an ID missing, right? It's like, that's that technical debt that we've built up for so long. MDM was coming in to add that layer of augmentation to involve humans in that process. So there is all these kind of statistics out there backing up your question. It's got a high failure rate. In our experience, it's come down to this. And this analogy can also be used across just data projects in general. Isn't it odd that in data projects, we somehow have to figure out what our data looks like up front, how it's supposed to fit together and end up looking like up front before we even start to really pull data in to a system. That for me is super odd. For data warehousing, I get it more, but for MDM, a system that's supposed to help you have this data harmonized, for it to be the first thing to say, whoa, 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 before you even enter data into me, tell me what a customer record looks like and tell me what the type of data it is. Should an age be a number? Yes. Well, what happens when it's not? Well, immediately that becomes an IT problem. But going back to that Wikipedia definition, it was about adding the business layer to it. So that upfront complex modeling we saw was one of the most complex parts of cracking these projects, because you had to go out with Excel, talk with your customers for many, many months about what is your different domains, what are important, what does it look like in that system, what does it look like in that system. You have to solidify and kind of sign off on this information model and say, yeah, that looks great. And then the problem actually started just then, in that the business says, that looks great, I can operate my business off it. But then when you take it back to IT, once again, we're already failing with MDM, that we're taking this back to MDM, to IT. It's our data doesn't look like that at all. And I'll spend my entire career buried in ETL pipelines trying to bend our data. And let's hope this lasts for 3 or 5 years, this model, because that will justify any ROI. That, cheers, by the way. I mean, it is a coffee meeting. We should have our coffee.
Indeed.
And these were some of the reasons. I think all of that has culminated in this idea of, why do we still think there's this chasm and void in our data stacks? This is it, because we knew 30 years ago we were supposed to involve the business, but yet data warehouses, BI, MI, data lakes, data integration, data engineering pipelines, these are all heavily IT driven and IT operated parts of the stack. Where is the business in this entire process? And that, for me, is one of the reasons why MDM has such a failure rate traditionally. But this is also, for me, exciting part about CluedIn, as you'll know, Martin, as you work with your customers as well with it, is there is obviously a huge quantum leap that's been made in this market, in that we're getting back to that point where we can actually give the business some tools to operate and play a key role in this data supply chain. But in that same vein, why do you think MDM failed, Martin? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that or not?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up this whole decentralization, centralization issue earlier, and it kind of reminded me of a company that I work with from a consulting perspective, that basically just pushed out this kind of approach where the business would have to tag their own data, right? But they didn't really put any strict or guidance around how and you know what the proper process was for them to do it. And so it ended up in a spaghetti bowl, right? It was just a complete mess. And then when that data was then used by, well, you know, central IT or to create any sort of data platforms, they had to completely go back and revamp the entire, because they essentially pushed out the onus to the end user, right, without really providing any clear guidelines. And so just that sentence there can give you an idea over a 6 or 12-month period, you know, what ends up happening, right? So, and I've seen that time and time again, and not just from a data quality perspective, but from a, you know, from a document management perspective, with classification and, you know, different types of scenarios that apply here. And so it's always this kind of balance between how much onus do you push to the end user and how much do you have centrally, right? And so, you know, and so I guess my question coming back to that whole centralized, decentralized question is, you know, how does CluedIn approach that differently to what has traditionally, you know, taken place?
Yeah, so I mean, an information model is really important. Let's establish that. Because to some degree, it's something that the business can say, yeah, I can operate my business like that. In fact, in some industries, they're regulated to run their business off certain operational models. The insurance business and the financial services business is an example of they need to prove to auditors that they operate off an information model where, for example, customers have a direct connection to accounts, and for the insurance, that claims have a direct connection to an account manager. The journey and the desire to fit into an information model is 100% the right thing to do. CluedIn basically went about challenging the market to say, yes, but why do we have to do that so abruptly? Like, why do we just reach this wall where we say, there it is, now fit it in? Now, any good solution architect like yourself that's pulling a solution together for a customer would know that when something is complex, you basically decompose it into smaller, more easily consumable steps. And we've seen that in the data space over the last few years. For example, the introduction of a data lake, right? Did the data lake fundamentally revolutionize the industry? Well, you would say that the data lake really didn't solve anything drastically complex, but it broke down a bigger problem into a smaller chunk, where the data lake sat there and said, okay, instead of trying to solve 10 things, I'm just going to solve 2 parts of the entire chain, which is all of your data is in the same place and it's in the same format. Right, that's what you're supposed to do here. Move on. Like, that's all I'll ever do. CluedIn has taken the same type of challenge, but applied it to that kind of modeling and data quality piece, where it says the goal of CluedIn is not to so abruptly fit into that information model on entry into the MDM system, but rather let me actually build you a model based off how the data just naturally fits and links together. And it's, I could hear everybody on the call right now yelling, yeah, but like, so you're delaying the problem. Yes, 100%. I am delaying the problem because I'm breaking it down into smaller chunks where our job is just to have records merging and linking. It might not look like you're drawing on a whiteboard or your UML diagram that says that things have to move together like this, but it's linking and merging. And what that does is it makes that next step of fitting into that information model that you've drawn, or any future information model that I'm not even going to say that you will end up moving to as well, much easier. You're breaking down a complex thing into smaller, easily consumable chunks. And the reason why this is operatable by and implementable by the business is that you're no longer having to conform abruptly to, hey, Sarah, that works in marketing, how does all of those systems fit into this? That's an IT problem, right? By just saying, hey, please describe your data and tell me what are the unique attributes of a record, like what would uniquely describe a customer, right? And it might be a customer ID, it might be their email address, it might be their IBAN number or a VAT number or something like this. And basically what CluedIn's doing is saying, cool, you've given me all the pointers between these records. I'll wire these pointers up using a graph database because that provides that flexible modeling that says, actually, you don't have to model data, your domains at a table level or a domain level. You can model it at a record level, where every record might link and merge to each other with a different ID. Getting back to our initial discussion where I said, when you have these 2 tables and you join them and all those records dropped, right? Suddenly you start to think, yeah, but not all records might just join off that ID. They might have multiple ways that they can link together, and trying to build that query of, okay, join these 2 tables off this ID, and if that doesn't work, then join off this ID, and if that doesn't work, then join off this ID. that pattern that CluedIn has brought to the market essentially says, well, you don't have to tell me how records fit together. You're just supposed to tell me unique ways to refer to records. I'll wire that up for you because I haven't been rigidly given this structure that you must abruptly fit into. That's one of the things that CluedIn has brought to the market that I think has cracked that complexity. And the other is obviously the NoSQL movement that feels like it happened 60 years ago now, but it's only actually relatively recent. What that brought as well is this idea of you don't need a schema up front as well. So a customer, you're not mandated that you have to tell it that the customer's age is a number or an integer or a big int or whatever that is. It's a little bit more flexible. And I see that so appropriate for the MDM space, because MDM is supposed to be a system that says, bring me your bad data, bring it to me. Don't reject it just because it doesn't look like a perfect record. Yet traditionally speaking, this is the shackles that we've been given in MDM.
Yeah, I really like a comparison between, creating a data lake for all of your data sources that sort of centralizes and unifies your data. Comparing that to what CluedIn does for essentially your schema, right? So your data model, right? So, and that's often that's actually a really good way to describe it. So I think I'm going to steal that for future conversations with customers. So I think that's a really good way to describe it. So just being conscious of time, I do have one more question. So for people that are watching this, and taking that conversation again back to that decentralized, centralized sort of approach, where it's often the case where you either tackle one system or two systems at a time, or you do a big bang approach, right? And both have pros and cons, of course. But what would you recommend is a good starting point for people watching to to get their feet wet with CluedIn and to really understand where it adds value and build a business case internally that can help them to implement CluedIn?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would argue that there's not many people that actually enjoy these big bang projects at all. Right? I think for all parties involved, of course there is this kind of upfront idea of I don't need to give anything out for 6 months. That's actually I'd say that's a real it'll sting you, right, really quickly, right? So I think one of the key things is this agility to be able to prove some value on regular occasions and accelerate that time to value, right? Can you just imagine buying these big old expensive data warehouses and saying in 12 months I'll have something to show, right? Now the world was used to that, but now they're not. Now they're used to give me something quick. Now the complexity with traditional MDM was that it didn't allow you to do that. It said, first of all, get your model right, then get all your data in, and only once it's all in, then tackle data quality, and only then tackle deduplication, and. So it was this very you have to wait 3 months to get the next big step in value. I think my advice would be these quick wins where you can show that there's a process in place, that if you were just to throw more people at it, things would happen faster. A good example would be raising the overall data quality, whether that's the accuracy of your data or something like this, by 0.01% a day or by 1% a month, something, and track that for a couple of months. That's something you can take back to the business and say, listen, if you want overall higher data quality, I've shown that I just need more people, data stewards and data analysts, but we have this process in place. That's one that I would strongly recommend. I think everybody is aware that having better data quality should yield better results, right? So the other thing is make sure you have some tangible way to actually show that your business, that investing in data quality yields some outcome that somehow ties to revenue or cost reduction or more happy staff or customers that stay with you for longer, some metric that doesn't just come back to these core data quality pieces, but you can actually tie back to why a business would actually reinvest in more of this. That would be my advice.
Yeah, and definitely I concur with that. I mean, as a data scientist, that's essentially our job, is to show that value, right? And what part of that value comes from having a streamlined access to good quality data. But yeah, so it's been really fantastic to chat with you, Tim.
Yeah,
I think we're out of time, so I'll hand back to Trudy.
Thanks, guys.
No, thank you. That was great, Tim and Martin. So many hints and tips, and hopefully we've gotten some good use out there. And so again, thank you. And no questions have come through. Unfortunately, we've gone over, so I think there's a few people which are just stewing on all the information that you've given them. Any questions, you can always reach out to either Tim or Martin and come through to Antares, and we can assist with all the CluedIn questions that you might have. Again, thank you both, and we'll leave it there.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Talk soon.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.